Clara Whitcomb did not cry when her father told her to pack her things. She stood at the kitchen table, hands flat against the wood, and breathed slow and quiet while her brothers laughed behind her back. She was 24 years old, plain-faced and steady-handed, and the man she was being sent to had a face full of burn scars and a reputation that kept women on the other side of the street. But Clara picked up her grandmother's wooden comb, tucked it into her coat pocket, and walked out the door without a single word. If this story already has your heart beating faster, hit that subscribe button right now and follow Clara's journey all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The summer of 1879 came in hard and dry to the flatlands outside Abilene, Kansas. The kind of summer that cracked the earth into puzzle pieces and turned the air above the road into a shimmering wall of heat. The kind of summer where every living thing moved slower, breathed heavier, and kept its eyes low against the glare. Clara Whitcomb had been moving slow and keeping her eyes low for most of her life. It had nothing to do with the heat. She was at the well before sunrise the way she was every morning, working the crank with both hands while the rope groaned and the bucket came up heavy with water. The farmhouse behind her was already loud. Roy was shouting at Caleb about something. Their father's boots were scraping the kitchen floor. The chickens were complaining in their pen, which meant nobody had fed them yet, which meant Clara would feed them the same as she always did, the same as she did every single morning, without being asked and without being thanked. She set the bucket down on the stone rim of the well and pressed her palms flat against the cool rock for just one breath. One breath that belonged to her. Then she picked up the bucket and carried it toward the house. "There she is," Roy called from the porch. He was leaning against the post with his boots crossed, a tin cup in his hand, grinning the way he always grinned when he had something mean to say and an audience to say it to. "Slow as a sick mule, same as always." Caleb laughed. He was sitting on the step, whittling at nothing, just making a mess of wood shavings he wouldn't clean up. "Don't be cruel, Roy. She's carrying water. That's about all she's good for." Clara walked past both of them without a word. She had learned years ago that answering only gave them more to work with. Inside, her father was at the table with a piece of paper folded in his hands and an expression she didn't trust. Silas Whitcomb was a man who had been failing at things his whole life and had developed a talent for making that failure feel like someone else's fault. He looked up when she came in and said nothing for a moment. Just watched her set the bucket down and begin filling the coffee pot. "Heard something in town yesterday," he said finally. Clara said, "Elias Boone is looking for a wife." She set the pot on the stove. "I heard that too." "You know who that is." "Everybody knows who that is, Daddy. Elias Boone." The name moved through Abilene, the way a cold wind moved through a hot room, sudden and uncomfortable and impossible to ignore. He owned Black Cedar Ranch, 12 miles north of town, a spread of land that had been in the Boone family for 30 years. He was 36 years old, broad through the shoulders, and his face had been burned in a range fire 6 years back that had taken his wife and nearly taken him. The left side of his face carried the scars. So did the way he walked, straight, deliberate, like a man who had decided that the world was going to look at him whether he liked it or not, so he might as well give it something to look at. Women in town whispered about him, not with admiration, with something closer to pity mixed with fear. Clara did not pity him. She had never really thought about him much at all. "They say he sent word to the county office," her father continued, "looking for a woman willing to come and keep house. Says he'll marry her legal and proper if she's willing." Roy had followed her inside. He leaned against the doorframe with that grin still on his face. Half the women in Abilene heard about it. Not one of them wrote back. "On account of his face," Caleb added, coming in behind him. "On account of his face," Roy agreed. Silas set the paper down on the table and smoothed it with one hand. He was looking at Clara the way a man looks at something he's trying to figure out how to get rid of. Her stomach went cold. "Daddy," she said carefully. "What is that paper?" "A letter," he said. "From Elias Boone." "Addressed to who?" He didn't answer right away. Roy and Caleb exchanged a look behind her, and she heard one of them swallow a laugh. "Addressed to you," her father said. Clara turned all the way around. "That's not possible. I've never spoken to Elias Boone in my life." "Well, seems he's heard of you." "That's not—" She stopped. She looked at her brothers. Roy's grin had gotten wider. Caleb was staring at the sealing lips pressed together. "You wrote it," she said. "You wrote a letter in his name." "Now, Clara, you forged his signature." Her voice came out flat, not angry yet, just flat and certain the way a statement of fact sounds when the fact is terrible. "You wrote a letter pretending to be Elias Boone, and you addressed it to me." "We did you a favor," Roy said. "Nobody else was going to ask for you." "One ugly soul for another," Caleb said, and then he did laugh, and Roy joined him, and their father looked down at the table and said nothing, which was the same as agreeing. Clara stood very still in the middle of the kitchen. She was 24 years old. She had kept this house since she was 11, when her mother died of fever, and her father sat down in his chair and more or less never stood back up as a father again. She had cooked and cleaned and mended and planted and carried water and fed animals and done everything that needed doing, and she had done it without complaint, because complaining had never once changed a single thing in this house. And now they had written a false letter in a stranger's name and addressed it to her like a joke. "I'm not going," she said. "You are," her father said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small cloth pouch that made a sound like coins. "I already took the travel money from the county fund. Stage runs north tomorrow morning." "You already spent the money." "I already told him you'd come." "You told Elias Boone. I sent a letter back saying his intended was on her way." Her father stood up. He was not a tall man, but he knew how to make himself feel large in a small room. "If he takes one look at you and sends you right back, that's your business, but you are getting on that stage." "And if I refuse?" Silas looked at her for a long moment. Then he said quietly, and without any heat at all, which was somehow worse than shouting, "Then don't come back." Clara did not sleep that night. She lay on her narrow cot in the room off the kitchen and stared at the ceiling and listened to her brother's snore and her father's chair creak, and she thought about every road her life could possibly take from this moment, and found that most of them led nowhere good. She could refuse to go. She could walk into Abilene alone and find work doing what taking in laundry maybe. Cleaning rooms at the hotel for 40 cents a week. She had no money of her own. She had nothing of her own except the wooden comb her grandmother had left her, a dress that wasn't entirely patched through, and a stubbornness that had kept her going for 13 years in a house that treated her like furniture. Or she could get on the stage. She could go to Black Cedar Ranch and face Elias Boone and let him look at her and make his judgment the way everyone else always made their judgment, fast and final. And when he sent her away, she would at least be somewhere new, somewhere that was not here. She pulled her grandmother's comb out from under her pillow and held it in both hands in the dark. Her grandmother had been a plain woman too. People had said so openly, and she had simply smiled and said, "Plain is what you see when you're not paying attention." Clara did not know if that was true, but she held onto the comb anyway. Before first light, she was up, washing her face, combing her hair, folding her 2 spare dresses into the old carpet bag she'd had since childhood. She moved through the kitchen without lighting a lamp. She found the heel of a bread loaf and wrapped it in a cloth. She filled her canteen. She was on the front porch with her bag at her feet when the first gray light started to come over the edge of the land. Roy came out in his undershirt, squinting and scratching the back of his neck. He looked at her standing there with her bag, and he shook his head slowly, like he was watching something both predictable and amusing. "You're really going," he said. "Appear so. He's going to take one look at you and put you right back on the stage." He picked at his teeth with his thumbnail. "But hey, maybe he's desperate enough." Clara picked up her bag. "Move out of my way, Roy." He stepped aside, still grinning, and she walked down the porch steps and onto the road without looking back. She heard Caleb call from inside. "Tell the ugly cowboy we said hello." She kept walking. The stage to Black Cedar was a rattling, dust-choked affair that took most of 2 days across country, that stretched out flat and pale in every direction, broken only by scrub brush and the occasional windmill turning slow in the dead summer air. Clara shared the stage with a dry goods merchant who slept most of the way, and a woman in a yellow dress who looked at Clara's patched coat and then looked away and did not look back. Clara spent most of the journey watching the land go by through the small window and thinking about nothing specific, which was a skill she had developed over years of surviving situations she had no power to change. On the afternoon of the second day, the stage crested a low hill, and Black Cedar Ranch came into view. It was bigger than she'd expected. The main house was solid and square, built from timber and stone, with a covered porch running the full length of the front. There were barns and outbuildings, a proper chicken coop, a kitchen garden that someone had actually tended. A windmill turned in the dry air. 2 horses grazed in a near pasture behind a good fence. Clara had expected something broken down, something as damaged on the outside as its owner was rumored to be. This was not that. This was a working ranch cared for, functional, the kind of place that took serious labor to maintain. She found that interesting. The stage slowed and stopped at the gate. The driver climbed down to get her bag. Clara stepped out onto the road, smoothed her skirt with both palms, and looked up. Elias Boone was standing at the gate. He was everything the town had said, and nothing like what she'd imagined. He was tall, genuinely tall, not just compared to the men she'd grown up around, but tall in a way that seemed structural, like the man had been built with a specific purpose in mind. His shoulders were broad under a worn canvas shirt. His hat was pulled low. His hands were at his sides, open, relaxed. And his face. The left side of his face, which she could see clearly in the afternoon light, was scarred from the jaw up to the temple. The skin pulled tight and discolored, a record of something terrible that had happened and been survived. He looked at her. She looked at him. He removed his hat. "Miss Whitcomb," he said. His voice was low and even. "You must be tired from the road. Supper's been ready since noon." Clara had braced herself for many things: disappointment, dismissal, a look that started at her face and ended in a polite excuse about a misunderstanding. She had not braced herself for simple courtesy. "Thank you," she said, and was surprised that her own voice came out steady. "I am a little tired." "Ada's inside," he said. "She'll show you your room." He said your room like it was a fact, like it already belonged to her, like her being here was not a question still waiting to be answered. She followed him through the gate. Ada Boone was 52 years old, with gray-streaked hair pinned practical and an expression that took the full measure of a person in about 3 seconds flat. She was Elias's older sister, widowed 15 years back, and she had come to Black Cedar after her husband passed and never left, because as she told Clara later, the ranch needed someone sensible, and her brother was many things, but sensible was not always chief among them. She took one look at Clara in the doorway. The patched dress, the carpet bag, the careful way Clara held herself like she was waiting to be told to leave, and she said, "Come in, honey. You look like you've been on a stage for 2 days in July, which I know for a fact is about as fun as climbing into an oven." "It was warm," Clara agreed. "I've got cool water, and there's stew on the back of the stove. Your room is the second door on the left, and it's got a window that catches the evening breeze, which is about the best I can offer you until the weather breaks." Ada was already moving as she talked, filling a basin, setting out a clean cloth. "Wash up, eat something, and sleep. We can do all the formal how-do-you-do business tomorrow." Clara stood in the middle of the kitchen and felt something she couldn't immediately name. It took her a moment to identify it because she hadn't felt it in a very long time. She felt welcome. It was disorienting enough that her eyes stung just for a second, and she pressed her lips together and made herself breathe through it. "Thank you, ma'am," she said. "Ada," the woman said firmly. "None of that ma'am business." She woke before the sun, which was habit, and was out on the porch with her sleeves rolled up before she'd figured out exactly what she meant to do with herself. The ranch was already stirring. She could hear movement in the barn. Someone talking low to the horses, the sound of a bucket being filled at the pump. She went to the chicken coop first, found the feed bin, found the scoop, opened the coop, and fed the birds while they complained at her like she'd personally offended them. Then she found the kitchen garden and pulled the weeds that had gotten ambitious overnight. Then she went back inside and built the kitchen fire and started coffee because it was the kind of morning that called for coffee, and there was no reason she could see to let it go unmade. Ada came in at 6:30 and stopped in the doorway and looked at the swept floor and the fire and the coffee pot and the bowl of fresh pulled weeds sitting by the back door, and she said, "Lord have mercy, child, you didn't have to." "I needed something to do," Clara said. "I sleep light." Ada looked at her for a moment with something careful in her expression. Then she said, "How'd you take your coffee?" "Black," Clara said. "I was never much of a sweet tooth." "Well," Ada said, "we're going to get along just fine." Elias came in for breakfast at 7 with two of his ranch hands, men named Decker and Pierce, who were polite enough and curious in the way that men who'd heard about a mail-order bride situation tended to be curious, not rude, just watching. Clara set plates in front of all four of them without being asked, refilled the coffee without being asked, and did not make anything out of the watching. Elias ate and said little, which she was beginning to understand was simply how he was. After breakfast, he pushed back from the table and looked at her directly for the first time since the gate. "I want to say something," he said. Clara set down the dish she was holding. "All right. I don't know exactly what was in the letter you received, but I want you to know that whatever was promised, whatever arrangement was described, I'm not a man who expects a woman to work for her keep without a say in the matter." He kept his eyes on her face, not apologetic, just direct. "If you decide this isn't what you were looking for, I'll put you on the next stage myself and pay for your ticket. No hard feelings." Clara looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "What was in your letter, the one you sent to the county?" A pause. "I said I was looking for a woman willing to keep house, good cook, preferred no age requirement, and that I'd offer a legal marriage and fair treatment." "Fair treatment," she repeated. "That's what I said. Not particular qualities, not someone specifically." She watched his face. "You didn't ask for me specifically." Something shifted in his expression. He set his coffee cup down. "No," he said carefully. "I sent one letter to the county office. General. I didn't have a name in mind." Clara nodded slowly. "Then there's something I need to tell you," she said, "about how I came to be on that stage." She told him. All of it. The forged letter, the stolen travel money, her brother's laughter, her father's ultimatum. She told it straight without decoration, without asking for sympathy, because she had never been good at asking for things, and she wasn't going to start now. When she finished, the kitchen was very quiet. Elias Boone looked at the table for a long moment. Then he looked up at her. "So they sent you here as a joke," he said. "That's what it amounts to," Clara said. His jaw was tight. His hands flat on the table were very still. "And you came anyway." "I didn't have a better option." "That's honest," he said. "I try to be." He was quiet again. Long enough that she started mentally calculating the distance back to Abilene and whether she could get there before dark. Then he said, "The offer stands. You can stay or go. But if you stay, it's your choice, not your family's. And you'll be treated accordingly." Clara looked at this man with his scarred face and his quiet voice and his "you'll be treated accordingly," which was more than she had been offered in 24 years by the people who were supposed to love her. "I'll stay," she said, "at least until we see how we suit each other." He nodded. He picked up his coffee. "That seems fair." The first 2 weeks were careful and practical, the way new arrangements between strangers always are. Clara learned the rhythms of the ranch. She learned that Elias was up before 4, that he came in for breakfast at 7, and dinner at noon, and supper at 6, that he did not like to talk much at meals, but didn't mind if others did, that he had a particular attachment to the gray mare he called Smoke, who'd been with him since before the fire. She learned that he noticed things. Small things. The way a hinge squeaked. The way one of the fence posts in the south pasture was leaning. The way Decker favored his right hand on account of an old break that hadn't healed straight. He noticed these things, and he fixed them quietly, without making anything of it. He noticed things about her, too. She caught him watching once when she was talking to one of the barn cats that had taken to following her around. She was telling the cat in a low, reasonable voice that just because she'd given it milk yesterday didn't mean there was going to be milk every day. And she looked up, and Elias was standing in the barn doorway with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Sorry," she said. "For what?" he said. She didn't have an answer to that. He went back to what he was doing. It was the storm that changed things. Not between them that would take longer, but inside Clara something shifted the night of the summer storm. It came in fast from the northwest on a Thursday night, the way plain storms always do, no warning, and then everything at once. The thunder was the kind that came up through the ground before it came down from the sky. Clara was asleep when the first real crack of it hit, and she was awake and sitting upright before the echo died. She heard it immediately. Smoke panicking in the barn. The sound of hooves against wood, which meant the mare was kicking her stall, which meant she was going to hurt herself if nobody went to her. Clara was in her boots and out the door before she'd made any kind of conscious decision about it. The rain hit her like a wall. The yard between the house and the barn was mud inside of 30 seconds. She ran it anyway, leaning into the wind, and got the barn door open and slid inside, and found Smoke in full panic, whites of her eyes showing breath coming in hard gusts, hoof marks already in the stall wall. Clara did not grab for the halter. She had learned a long time ago that you don't grab at something that's afraid. You let it know you're there. You let it hear your voice. She put herself where Smoke could see her and started talking. Low, steady. Nothing words easy. Now easy. "You're all right. You're all right. Hear that? Just rain, just thunder. Nothing. That's going to touch you in here. You're safe in here. Easy." It took a while. Long enough that she was soaked through from the trip across the yard cold, in the way that July storms can make you cold, even when the air was 100 degrees 3 hours ago. But Smoke's breathing gradually slowed. Her eyes came back from the edge of terror. She put her nose toward Clara and huffed. "There," Clara said. "There you are." She didn't hear Elias come in. She just became aware at some point that he was standing a few feet behind her in the dark barn. Not close, not hovering, just present. She turned around. His expression was she didn't have a word for it exactly, like something had surprised him, like he hadn't expected what he'd walked in on. "She's all right," Clara said. "Spooked pretty bad, but she's coming down." He looked at her, soaked to the skin, hair plastered to her face, mud on her boots, and he reached back and took his coat off the peg by the barn door. He walked forward and put it around her shoulders without a word. It was enormous on her, heavy and warm and smelling of wood smoke and horses. She pulled it tighter around herself before she thought about it. "Thank you," she said. "You ran out here in a storm for my horse," he said. She was going to hurt herself. He looked at her for another moment with that same expression she couldn't name. Then he said, "I'll sit with her a while. Go back inside." "I'm already wet," Clara pointed out. "Fair enough," he said. They sat in the barn together until the storm passed, smoke calm between them, rain hammering the roof. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. And somewhere in that silence, in the dark barn, with the thunder rolling away to the south, Clara felt something settle into place inside her chest that had been loose and rattling around for as long as she could remember. She didn't put a name to it yet. She just let it be. What she did not know, what she had no way of knowing yet, was that 3 days later, Sheriff Nathan Pike would ride up the main road to Black Cedar Ranch with his hat in his hand and a look on his face that meant news nobody wanted to receive, and that the Whitcombs were not finished with her. Not by a long road. Clara Whitcomb had walked out of her father's house with her grandmother's comb in her pocket, and not a single door left open behind her. She had thought that was the end of one life and the beginning of another. She did not yet understand that the people who throw something away are often the first ones to come back looking for it when they realize someone else has decided it has value. Her brothers would be coming. Her father would be coming. And when they arrived at Black Cedar Ranch with their meanness and their claims and their old contempt, Clara would have to decide once and for all who she was willing to become. Sheriff Nathan Pike rode in on a Tuesday morning, and Clara knew before he even dismounted that whatever he was carrying wasn't good news. She was in the kitchen garden pulling the last of the morning's weeds when she heard the horse on the main road, and she straightened up and shielded her eyes against the July glare, and watched the man come down the drive at a pace that was too deliberate to be casual and too slow to be urgent. That particular pace meant someone was trying to figure out what to say before they had to say it. She wiped her hands on her apron and went inside. Elias was already on the porch by the time Pike tied up at the post. Ada had come out of the house behind him, drying her hands on a dishcloth. Her expression the same careful neutral she wore when she was trying to read a situation before committing to a reaction. Pike was a lean man, in his mid-40s, with a sun-weathered face and pale gray eyes that didn't miss much. He'd been sheriff in Abilene for 11 years, and before that, he'd been a cattle hand, and he moved like both economical, watchful, comfortable with silence. He touched his hat brim to Elias. "Morning." "Nathan," Elias said, "get down and come in. I'll stay out here if it's all the same." Pike looked past Elias to where Clara had appeared in the doorway. He touched his hat brim again. "Miss Whitcomb." Clara stepped out onto the porch. "Sheriff, I'm going to say this plain because that's the only way I know how to say things," Pike said. He looked at Elias. "You got a situation developing in town. The Whitcomb boys have been talking. Caleb, specifically. He's been telling anyone who'll listen that you paid to bring their sister out here, like a purchase." The air on the porch went very still. "That's a lie," Elias said. "I know it's a lie. But Caleb's got a loud voice and a particular talent for standing in the middle of the saloon on a Saturday night, and there are people in this town who'd rather believe an interesting lie than a boring truth." Pike turned his hat in his hands. "They're saying you brought her out here like property. They're saying the arrangement isn't decent." Clara felt the heat come up in her face. Not embarrassment. Something harder than that. "What people?" Elias asked. "Leonard Pruitt, the Hanson brothers. Pastor Ware's wife, which means half the women's auxiliary by now." Pike glanced at Clara again. "I'm not telling you this to frighten you, miss. I'm telling you because I think you both have a right to know what's being said before it shows up at your gate." "Has anyone spoken to the Whitcombs directly?" Elias asked. "About the letter, about the travel money?" "That's a delicate matter," Pike said carefully. "I can't move on rumor, Elias. I'd need something more solid." "I can give you something more solid," Clara said. Both men looked at her. She had not planned to speak, but the words were already there, already formed and waiting, and she found she was tired, very tired, bone-deep tired of staying quiet while other people told stories about her life. "My brothers forged that letter," she said. "They wrote it in Elias's name without his knowledge and addressed it to me. My father took the county travel money before I ever had a hand on it. I came here because I had no other choice, and I've stayed because I chose to." She looked at Pike steadily. "If you need me to write that out and sign it, I will." Pike was quiet for a moment, looking at her with those pale gray eyes. Then he said, "That would help, yes, ma'am. I'll write it today," she said. "You can have it by afternoon." He nodded. He looked at Elias. "You might want to think about bringing her into town sometime soon. Let people see the situation with their own eyes. Rumors die faster in daylight." "I'll think on it," Elias said. Pike put his hat back on. "I want you to know," he said, "that I'm not inclined to let the Whitcombs make trouble on your land. But I can only do so much before something happens that requires my presence. You understand my meaning?" "I understand your meaning," Elias said. Pike rode back down the drive. and the three of them stood on the porch and watched him go. Ada was the first one to speak. "Well," she said, "I suppose we knew this wasn't going to be simple." "Nothing ever is," Elias said. Clara looked at her hands. She was still holding the apron she'd grabbed when she came in from the garden, twisted now from where her fingers had been working at it, without her noticing. She made herself let go of it. "I'll write that statement," she said. "I'll write it right now." "Clara." Elias's voice was quiet. She looked up. "You don't have to prove anything to this town," he said. "Maybe not," she said. "But I'm going to anyway." She went inside and sat at the kitchen table and wrote for 40 minutes. She wrote it the way she'd told it to Elias that first morning, straight and plain, without decoration, without asking for sympathy. She wrote the forged letter, the stolen money, her father's ultimatum, the 2-day stage ride, the arrival. She wrote that she had stayed of her own choosing and that the arrangement at Black Cedar Ranch was decent, and that Elias Boone had at no point treated her as anything other than a person deserving of fair treatment. She signed her full name at the bottom, Clara Ann Whitcomb. When she brought it out to Elias, he read it without speaking. Then he folded it carefully and said, "I'll have Decker ride it to town this afternoon." "All right," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "You write well," he said. "Not flattery, just a statement." "My mother taught me," Clara said. "She thought it was important." She paused. She was right. Elias nodded. He tucked the letter inside his vest, and then he said in that quiet way he had, that made things sound like they'd been thought through before being spoken. "Whatever they say in town, it doesn't change what's true out here. You know that." Clara looked at him. "I know it," she said. She wasn't entirely sure she believed it yet, but she was working on it. The days that followed had a surface calm that Clara recognized from experience as the particular quiet that comes before something breaks. She'd felt it before in her father's house, before a bad harvest, before the bill collectors came, before one of her brothers did something that cost everybody. The air gets a held breath quality. The ordinary things feel slightly too ordinary, like they're working harder than usual at seeming normal. She kept herself busy because that was what she did. The kitchen garden was producing well, and she put up 3 quarts of tomatoes and started a 4th batch. She fixed the latch on the root cellar door that had been sticking for weeks. She mended 2 of Elias's shirts and 1 of Decker's without being asked because the shirts needed mending, and she had the thread and the skill and nothing else useful to do with her hands in the evenings. Ada watched her with a particular expression during this time. Not concerned exactly. More like waiting. "You going to tell me what's on your mind?" Clara finally asked one evening. They were sitting at the kitchen table after supper, Ada with her knitting and Clara with the mending. "I was going to ask you the same thing," Ada said. "I'm fine." "You're busy," Ada said. "Those are not the same thing, honey." Clara set down the shirt she was working on. "I keep thinking they're going to come," she said. "My brothers, my father. I keep waiting for it." "They probably will," Ada said, which was not what Clara had expected her to say. She'd expected some form of reassurance. "You don't think they'll stay away. Men like your father don't stay away when there's something they think they can get," Ada said. She kept her eyes on her knitting. "What they threw out, what they decided had no value, the minute someone else finds value in it, it becomes theirs again. That's how that kind of mind works." Clara was quiet for a moment. "What do you think they want?" "They don't want me back. They never wanted me at all." "No," Ada agreed. "But they want what you represent now. A woman with a place. A woman with a man standing beside her." She looked up. "That's a different thing entirely from the daughter they sent away." The words landed somewhere uncomfortable, and Clara picked up the shirt again and sewed 3 more stitches before she said, "Does that bother Elias? The possibility of them coming?" "You'd have to ask Elias." "I'm asking you." Ada smiled slightly. "Elias doesn't rattle easy," she said. "He's dealt with things that would have broken most men and came out the other side still standing. Your family doesn't frighten him." She paused. What would bother him is the idea that you might feel like you have to deal with them alone. Clara looked up. He's not good at saying things, Ada continued. He never has been. The fire didn't cause that he was always that way. But he notices, and he thinks, and when he decides something matters to him, he's decided it for good. She looked back down at her knitting. I'm just saying, don't mistake quiet for indifference. Clara held that thought very carefully, the way you hold something fragile that you're not sure belongs to you yet. He told me about his wife, she said. A little, about the fire. Did he? Ada's needles slowed slightly. He didn't say much, but he said enough. Ada was quiet for a moment. Ellen was a good woman, she said. He loved her very much. After she was gone after the fire, he went somewhere inside himself, and it took a long time for any light to get back in. She looked up at Clara. You've been letting some light in. I notice it, even if he hasn't said it. Clara looked down at her hands, at the needle and the thread and the shirt that needed mending. I don't know how to be loved, she said. It came out quieter than she'd intended, more exposed. Nobody does, Ada said. They just practice until it starts to feel natural. That was the closest Clara came to crying in those weeks between the sheriff's visit and the morning everything changed. She made herself breathe through it, the way she always did, and went back to her mending, and Ada went back to her knitting, and the lamp burned between them in the warm summer dark. It was the following Saturday that Elias told her he was taking her to town. He said it at breakfast matter-of-fact the way he said most things. I need to go into Abilene today. Pick up feed order, talk to Hargrove about the fence wire. You should come. Clara looked up from her coffee. Should I? Pike said people should see the situation with their own eyes, Elias said. He's right. Better to walk into it than wait for it to come here. She thought about the saloon and Caleb's loud voice, and Pastor Ware's wife, and the women's auxiliary. She thought about walking down the main street of Abilene with a scarred rancher and having people look at her the way they'd been looking at her whole life, with that particular combination of pity and dismissal, except now with the added ingredient of judgment. All right, she said. He looked slightly surprised, like he'd expected more resistance. I said all right, she repeated. I'll get my good dress. She had one good dress. It was blue calico faded from washing, but still decent, and she'd let out the hem last winter and done it neatly enough that you couldn't tell. She put her hair up properly and used her grandmother's comb, the good one, the one she kept for times when she needed to feel like herself. She looked at her reflection in the small mirror in her room and thought, plain is what you see when you're not paying attention. She squared her shoulders and went out to the wagon. The road into Abilene was dry and hot and took 40 minutes at wagon pace. Elias drove and said little. Clara sat beside him and watched the land and worked on keeping her breathing even. At some point, without her having planned it, she started talking about the root cellar latch, about the third jar of tomatoes that hadn't sealed right, about the cat that followed her everywhere, and had recently taken to sleeping on the porch steps in a way that strongly implied it considered the porch steps its personal property. Elias listened. He made small sounds at the appropriate moments. Once he almost smiled. By the time Abilene came into view, Clara had stopped noticing her own breathing. They tied up in front of Hargrove's supply store. Elias climbed down and came around to her side and held out his hand to help her down, which was so straightforward and unremarkable that she nearly missed it. Just a hand offered a simple courtesy, the kind of thing a decent man does for a woman stepping off a wagon. She took his hand and stepped down. 3 women outside the dry goods store were watching. Clara met their eyes. She did not look away first. Inside Hargrove's, a man named Clement, who Clara did not know, said in a too loud voice to the man beside him, "That the Whitcomb girl Boone sent away for." And Elias's hand went briefly to the small of Clara's back, not gripping, not possessive, just present. And he said, "Afternoon, Clement," in a tone that closed the conversation like a door closing, and Clement found something very interesting to look at on the shelf nearest him. They worked through the supply list. Elias talked to Hargrove about feed prices. Clara asked the woman at the dry goods counter about thread stock and ended up having a 10-minute conversation about a quilting pattern that the woman's daughter had been working on. And by the end of it, the woman had told Clara her name was Mrs. Ellers, and that if Clara ever needed help putting up preserves, she had a spare canning kit she wasn't using. That was how it went. Not everyone was warm. There were looks, and there were whispered comments at the edge of earshot. But Clara walked through all of it with her shoulders square, and her grandmother's comb in her hair, and Elias Boone a measured distance beside her. And the town saw what it saw. They were loading the wagon when Roy Whitcomb stepped off the saloon porch. Clara heard him before she saw him that particular lazy drawl her oldest brother used when he was feeling confident and had probably been drinking since noon. "Well, I'll be," Roy said. "Little sister cleaned up good." She did not turn around immediately. She set the bag she was holding into the wagon bed, set it down carefully, and then she turned. Roy was leaning against the post at the saloon steps with his thumbs in his belt and that grin that had been irritating her since she was old enough to understand what contempt looked like wearing a smile. "Roy," she said. "Didn't know if you'd made it," he said. He was looking at Elias now, that particular assessing look men give each other when they're trying to figure out the power arrangement. "This the scarred cowboy then? My name is Elias Boone," Elias said. His voice was level. "And I'd suggest you be careful about what comes out of your mouth next." Roy held his hands up in a mockery of surrender. "Just saying hello to my sister. No harm in a brother wanting to see his sister settled and happy." He looked at Clara again. "You happy, Clara? Out there on his ranch?" "I am," she said. "That's so." He scratched the back of his neck. "Funny thing. Daddy's been having some trouble with the farm. Roofs leaking. Fences down. He was saying just the other day how nice it would be if you were around to help out." "He said that," Clara said. "He did." "He also said not to come back unless Elias refused me," she said, "which was 3 weeks ago. So which is it, Roy? Am I not wanted, or am I suddenly needed because I can't be both?" Roy's grin stayed in place, but something shifted behind it. He hadn't expected that. He was used to Clara going quiet, going small. He was used to being able to say a thing and watch her absorb it without pushing back. She was not going to do that anymore. "Don't get above yourself," Roy said, and there was an edge in it now. "I'm exactly where I should be," she said. "Go home, Roy." He looked at Elias. "You let her talk like that." Elias looked at him for a long, quiet moment. "She talks however she pleases," he said. "That's generally how it works with people who have a mind of their own." Roy's jaw worked. He stood there another beat, 2 beats, the grin trying to hold and not quite managing it. Then he pushed off the post and walked back into the saloon without another word. Elias waited until the saloon doors stopped swinging. Then he looked at Clara. "You all right?" he asked. Her heart was beating very fast. Her hands were steady. "Yes," she said. "That happened often. In there?" "My whole life," she said. He nodded. He picked up the last bag and set it in the wagon. "It won't happen here," he said. "Not when I'm standing next to you." "I know," she said, and she meant it differently than she would have meant it 3 weeks ago. Less like a statement of fact, more like something she had decided to trust. They drove back to Black Cedar in the late afternoon, the sun throwing long shadows across the road and the summer air beginning to thin toward evening. Clara watched the light change on the grassland and felt something she couldn't quite articulate. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but something adjacent to it. Something that felt like the possibility of happiness, which was more than she'd had in a long time. She didn't realize she'd said any of that out loud until Elias said, "The possibility of it is usually where it starts." She looked at him. "Did I say that out loud?" "Some of it," he said. She felt heat in her face. "I do that sometimes. I lived alone in my own head for a long time." "I know the feeling," he said quietly. They rode in silence for a while after that. The good kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. "Elias?" she said eventually. Why did you send that letter to the county? Why did you decide to do it?" He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "Ada pushed me too." "But you did it." "I did it," he agreed. "Why?" He looked at the road ahead. "Because I was tired," he said finally. "Not tired in the way that a night's sleep fixes. Tired in the way where you wake up in the morning and the first thing you feel is how quiet the house is. That kind of tired." Clara looked at her hands in her lap. "I know that kind of tired," she said. "I figured you might," he said. The wagon rolled on. The grassland stretched out gold and brown around them, and the evening air was finally beginning to ease off the heat of the day. And Clara sat beside this quiet, scarred, surprisingly decent man, and thought about loneliness. How it sounds at 4 in the morning, in a house that used to have more people in it. And how strange it was that two people who had each been carrying that particular weight could end up on the same wagon seat through a chain of events that had started as someone else's cruelty. That was the thing about the Whitcombs' joke, she thought. They'd meant it to humiliate her. They'd meant for her to fail. And instead, she was here watching the sunset over Black Cedar Land, and something that had been wound tight in her chest for 24 years was just beginning very slowly to loosen. She did not know yet that Roy hadn't gone back inside the saloon to drink alone. She did not know that he'd sent a message to their father that same afternoon, a short message that said simply that Clara was settled in and that the ranch looked prosperous, which in the language of the Whitcomb men meant only one thing. She did not know that Silas Whitcomb had read that message and begun calculating. She did not know that in 4 days, all three of them, her father Caleb Roy, would be on the road to Black Cedar Ranch with a story prepared and a claim that had no legal basis, but could cause significant damage if delivered loudly enough in a small town that was still making up its mind about what to think of the scarred rancher and the plain-faced girl he'd brought out from Abilene. What she knew was the wagon and the road and the evening air, and the way Elias's profile looked in the last of the day's light, steady and scarred, and present, more present than most people ever managed to be. She knew her grandmother's comb was still in her hair, holding it in place. She knew that when Ada came out onto the porch to meet them, as the wagon pulled into the drive, the older woman took one look at the two of them side by side and said nothing at all, just smiled in that quiet, complete way that meant she was satisfied with what she was seeing. She knew that she hadn't lowered her eyes once in Abilene, not once, not for Roy, and not for the women outside the dry goods store, and not for Clement, and not for any of the other watching, calculating faces that the town had turned toward her. She knew that for the first time in a very long time, she had taken up her own space in the world and not apologized for it. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to build on. Elias handed the reins to Decker and came around to help her down from the wagon, same as before. Hand offered simple courtesy. Nothing performed. She took his hand and stepped down. His hand was warm and calloused, and very certain of itself. She let go of it a half-second later than necessary. Neither of them mentioned it. But Ada, watching from the porch, tucked that half-second away and said nothing, and went back inside, smiling to herself. The night was warm and clear, and somewhere out past the barn, a whip-poor Will was calling, and the lantern on the porch threw a circle of light that just reached the gate, and no further. And for right now, that circle of light was everything Clara needed. She went inside to help Ada with supper. She did not know what was coming, but she was becoming very quietly and very surely the kind of woman who would be able to face it. They came on a Wednesday. Clara knew before she saw them. She was at the pump filling the morning bucket when she heard the horses on the main road. Not one horse, not the steady single rhythm of a rider with a purpose, but 3 horses moving together with the loose, unhurried gait of men who believe they have every right to be where they're going. She set the bucket down and straightened up and waited. Silas Whitcomb came through the gate first, which was how he always did things, putting himself in front to establish claim over whatever was happening before anyone had a chance to contest it. He was wearing his good coat, which meant he had dressed for this. That was the detail that frightened her most. A man who dresses for a confrontation has rehearsed it. Roy came in behind him, and Caleb behind Roy, and all three of them looked at Clara standing by the pump, with the same expression, the particular blend of assessment and contempt that she had grown up believing was simply how people looked at her. She understood now that it wasn't. "Clara," her father said. He said it the way he said most things, like a period at the end of a sentence, like a fact being confirmed rather than a greeting being offered. "Daddy," she said. He looked at the house, at the barn, at the outbuildings, at the kitchen garden. Calculating. "Place looks well kept," he said. "It is," she said. "You've been managing the house, among other things." Roy was looking at the barn with his head tilted, that lazy assessing look. "Good-sized operation," he said. "What's he running out here, 200 head? That's not your business, Roy. Just making conversation." "No, you're not," Clara said. "You don't make conversation. You gather information. There's a difference." All three of them looked at her. Her father's eyes narrowed slightly. "You've gotten sharp," Silas said, not approvingly. "I've always been sharp," Clara said. "You just weren't paying attention." She heard the screen door and didn't turn around because she knew from the particular sound of the step who it was. Elias came off the porch and crossed the yard and stopped about 6 feet from her father. He did not hurry. He did not make a show of planting himself. He just arrived and stood there, and he was a large man with a scarred face and a very still quality that some people read as dangerous and others read as simply immovable, and either reading was correct. "Mr. Whitcomb," he said. Silas looked at him, with the careful expression of a man adjusting his plan in real time. Whatever he'd rehearsed on the road out here, Elias's physical presence was making him recalculate. "Boone," he said, "I've come to speak with my daughter." "You're speaking with her," Elias said. "I'll stay while you do." Roy shifted his weight. Caleb picked at his thumbnail. These were the small movements of men who had expected less resistance than they were finding. Silas put his hands in his coat pockets and looked at Clara with an expression that was almost paternal, almost if you didn't know him well enough to see what was underneath it. "Your family misses you," he said. "The farm's been hard this summer. We thought maybe you'd want to know that." "I hope things improve for you," Clara said. He blinked. That wasn't the response he'd prepared for. "We thought maybe you'd want to come back. Help out for a time." "I'm not coming back," Clara said. "I told Roy that in town last week, and I'm telling you now. I live here." "You're not married yet," Caleb said. He said it like it was a card he was playing. "You're just keeping house. That's not the same as belonging somewhere." "Caleb," Elias said, and his voice hadn't changed in tone or volume. But Caleb stopped talking like a door had closed in front of him. Silas tried a different direction. "I heard there's been talk in town," he said, "about the arrangement here, about how you came to be out here." He paused. "I'd hate for that kind of talk to damage your reputation, Clara. A woman in your position?" "My position," Clara repeated. "Unmarried, no family near, living on a man's ranch." Silas spread his hands in a gesture of helpless concern. "People talk. People are talking because you and your son started the talking," Clara said. "Caleb stood in the middle of the saloon and told everyone Elias bought me. You know that's a lie. You wrote the letter that started this whole thing. Now I don't know what you think you remember." "I don't think," Clara said. "I know. I was there. You forged a letter in this man's name and gave me stale bread and an old carpet bag and put me on a stage." Her voice was even, not shaking. She had surprised herself somewhere around the word forged by discovering that she was not afraid of her father anymore. The fear had been there her whole life, a familiar weight she'd stopped noticing, and now that she was looking for it, she found it simply wasn't there. "I'm not confused about what happened. And I wrote it all down and signed it, and Sheriff Pike has a copy." Silas's face changed. The paternal expression dropped. What was underneath it was exactly what she'd always suspected a man who felt entitled to things that didn't belong to him, and was angry when the world pointed that out. "You wrote it down," he said. "Every word." He looked at Elias. "This is your doing." "No," Elias said. "She did that herself. Roy made a sound not quite a laugh, too mean to be a laugh. Daddy, she's turned against us. Look at her. She's standing there like she's above us now because she's got a big man to stand behind. Clara stepped forward. One step. Just one step. But it moved her ahead of Elias, put her in front of him, put her squarely in front of her brother with nothing between them. I'm not standing behind him, she said. I'm standing in front of you. And I want you to hear me clearly, Roy, because I'm only going to say it once. She held his gaze and did not blink. I spent 13 years cooking and cleaning and working in that house, and I never once heard you say a decent word to me. You sent me away because you thought I was worthless, and you thought I'd be humiliated. You were wrong on both counts. And the only reason you're standing on this property right now looking at what I've built is because someone else recognized what you were too lazy and too mean to see. She paused. So don't you talk to me about standing behind someone. You have no idea what standing on your own 2 feet feels like. You never did. Roy's face had gone dark. His jaw was tight. He looked like a man who wanted to say something and couldn't find the words, which was not a situation Roy Whitcomb was accustomed to finding himself in. Caleb looked at the ground. Silas looked at Clara for a long moment, really looked at her the way he almost never had, and what crossed his face was something she couldn't entirely read. It might have been surprise. It might have been somewhere buried under all the other things something close to shame. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. I didn't come just to talk, he said. He held the paper out toward Elias. I came about the water. Elias did not reach for it. What water? The creek that runs along the east edge of your property, crosses the corner of what used to be the Hadley parcel. Silas held the paper steady. I bought that parcel 3 months ago. Corner section. Includes the water rights to that creek. The yard went very quiet. Clara looked at her father. Then she looked at Elias. Elias's expression had not changed, but something in him had gone very still in a different way than before. The stillness of a man who's heard something that lands wrong and is working out exactly how wrong it lands. The Hadley parcel was sold at county auction, Elias said slowly. 8 months ago. 7, Silas said. And the corner section wasn't in the main auction. Separate transaction, private sale. He held out the paper again. I got the deed right here. Elias took the paper. He read it. He read it again. Clara watched his face and saw the moment he found the thing that bothered him most. She could see it in the slight tightening around his eye, the almost imperceptible press of his lips. If this is legitimate, Elias said, then you control the water rights to the East Creek. I do, Silas said. And you're here to tell me what exactly. I'm here to tell you that water rights cost money, Silas said, and that maybe we could come to an arrangement. He looked at Clara. A family arrangement. There it was. There was the real reason for the good coat and the rehearsed expression and the 3-man ride out to Black Cedar on a Wednesday morning. Not concern for Clara, not missing his daughter, not the farm's bad summer. He had found a lever, and he had come to use it. Clara looked at her father and felt something pass through her. Not the old fear, not anymore, but something colder and cleaner. Clarity. You bought that parcel specifically for this, she said. You found out about the water rights, and you bought that corner section so you'd have something to hold over him. I bought land, Silas said. That's legal. When did you have money to buy land? Clara said. You've been failing at farming for 15 years. You told me the roof was leaking. Where did the money come from? Silas said nothing. Roy looked at the fence post. Caleb was doing the ceiling examination again. Roy, Clara said, where did Daddy get money to buy land? Clara, the county travel fund, she said. It landed on her like cold water. The money they stole from me. My travel money. You used it to buy the Hadley corner section. Nobody denied it. Get off this property, Elias said. His voice had changed, not louder, not angrier exactly. But there was something in it that had not been there before, something that made Decker, who had appeared silently near the barn, go very still and stay very still." Silas stood his ground. "Now, Boone, there's no call to—" "There is every call," Elias said. "You came onto my land with a fraudulent claim backed by money you stole from your own daughter. You dressed it up as a family visit, and you held it over her head like a weight." He stepped forward. Not fast, just forward. "I've dealt with men like you before. Men who look at something they don't value and throw it away, and then come back when someone else picks it up and try to make a claim on it." He stopped when he was close enough that Silas had to look up at him. "She is not a thing to be claimed. And whatever legal fight you think you have about that water, you will have it in court in front of a judge with every piece of paper laid out on a table, including the letter you forged and the money you stole and the deed you bought with it." Silas's composure had slipped. He was trying to recover it. "You don't want a legal fight, Boone? That gets expensive." "I can afford expensive," Elias said. "Can you—" Roy took a half step forward. Decker moved away from the barn wall in the same moment, not threatening, just repositioning the way a man does when he's making sure all the angles are covered. Roy noticed and stopped. "We're leaving," Silas said. He got it out steady, but it cost him. "But this isn't finished." "It is for today," Elias said. "And I'll tell you plainly, the next time you ride onto this property, you come with a lawyer, or you don't come at all." Silas looked at Clara. His eyes moved over her face the way they never quite had before, like he was seeing something that surprised him, like the face he'd decided she had wasn't quite the face that was looking back at him. "Clara," he said. She met his eyes. "Goodbye, Daddy." He held her gaze for one more second. Then he turned and walked back through the gate, and Roy and Caleb followed, and the three horses moved back down the main road at the same deliberate pace they'd arrived with, and Clara stood in the yard and watched them until they were out of sight. Then she sat down on the edge of the water trough, not because her legs had given out, but because the weight of the last 20 minutes had finally registered in her body, and her body needed a moment to process it. Ada came off the porch. She didn't say anything. She just sat down next to Clara on the trough's edge and put her hand over Clara's hand. Elias stood a few feet away, still facing the road. "The deed," Clara said finally. "Is it real? The water claim?" "I don't know yet," Elias said. He was still holding the paper. "I need to get it to a lawyer." "If it's real, then we deal with it legally," he said. He turned around. His face was still and controlled, but his eyes were something else. "Don't let him make you feel like that's your fault." "I'm not," Clara said. And then, because she was still learning to say true things out loud, she said, "I'm not. But I want you to know that I understand if what I brought here, I understand if it complicates things for you." "You didn't bring it," Elias said. "They brought it. That's a different thing." "Elias, Clara." He said her name in that quiet final way he had that closed an argument before it could get started. "You were not the problem. You were never the problem." He folded the deed and put it in his vest. "Now come inside. Ada put the coffee on. We need to think." Ada patted Clara's hand once firmly and stood up. "Coffee's been on for an hour," she said. "I started it when I saw them coming down the road." Clara almost laughed. She pressed her lips together instead. "You saw them coming?" "Honey, I've been watching for them since the day after Pike rode out." Ada held out her hand. "Come on, let's go think this through." Clara took her hand and stood up and went inside. They sat at the kitchen table, the three of them, with coffee and the paper that Silas had handed over, and Elias spread the deed flat on the table, and they looked at it together. It had the county seal. It had signatures. It had a survey description that Clara couldn't read, but Elias could, and he traced the boundary lines with one finger and said under his breath, "Corner section, the one that backs up to the creek." "How much water does it control?" Ada asked. "Summer months." Elias looked up. "Enough." "Enough to matter," Ada said. "Enough to matter," he confirmed. Clara looked at the document. She looked at the county seal. She looked at the survey description that she couldn't read, and then she looked at the lines above it, the legal language, the property description, the notary mark. Something snagged. She leaned forward. "Elias," she said slowly. "This notary mark. What's the date on it?" He looked. "March 14th. And when did you say the main Hadley auction was?" "County auction was in—" He stopped. He looked at the date again. "February 3rd. So the main parcel sold February 3rd, Clara said. But this corner section was notarized March 14th, Elias said. He picked the paper up. 6 weeks after the main auction. Private sale. Who was the notary? Ada asked. Elias turned the paper and squinted at the stamp. Gerald T. Marsh. Ada made a sound. Clara looked at her. Gerald Marsh, Ada said carefully, is Leonard Pruitt's brother-in-law. The kitchen went quiet. Pruitt, Clara said. Leonard Pruitt. He's one of the men who's been spreading the talk about Elias in town. He's also on the county land records board, Ada said. She looked at Elias. He's been trying to get his hands on the East Creek access for years. You know that. You've had that argument with him twice that I know of. Elias set the paper down. He looked at it for a long moment with the particular expression of a man assembling pieces that were beginning to make a very specific picture. My father bought my land, Silas had said. He had money that nobody could account for, and Leonard Pruitt, who had failed twice to acquire the East Creek access through legitimate means, had a brother-in-law who was a notary and a seat on the county land board. They used him, Clara said. Pruitt used my father. He found a man who needed money and had a grudge and handed him just enough to make the purchase. And now Silas has a deed that looks legal. But the money trail leads somewhere interesting, Elias said. Can you prove it? Ada asked. Not today, Elias said. But I can get to the county records, and I can get a lawyer who knows land law. He looked at Clara. This isn't over, but it's a different fight than your father thinks he's started. Clara looked at the deed on the table. She thought about Pruitt and his loud voice and his seat on the land board and the particular convenience of all the pieces fitting together. She thought about her father in his good coat standing in the yard with his rehearsed expression holding that paper out like a gift. She thought about the fact that the man who'd spent her whole life treating her like she was worthless had finally, in trying to use her against Elias, given her something she could use back. I want to help, she said. With the records, with the lawyer. Whatever you need to put together. Elias looked at her across the table. You'd do that. They used me to get here, she said. The least I can do is help close the door on them. He held her gaze for a moment. Something moved through his expression. Not the cool, unreadable stillness she was used to from him, but something more open than that. Something that looked just for a second like gratitude mixed with something she wasn't ready to name. All right, he said. Then we do it together. Ada reached over and picked up the deed and held it up to the light from the window, squinting at it with the careful attention of a woman who had managed ranch accounts for 15 years and knew what a legitimate document looked like versus one that was trying too hard to appear legitimate. There's something else, she said. She set it back down and pointed to the survey description to a line near the bottom that Clara had looked at and passed over. This boundary marker, east corner post at the old Hadley well. She looked at Elias. Where is the old Hadley well? Elias leaned in. His finger moved to the same line. He read it twice. Then he sat back in his chair, and for a moment he said absolutely nothing. Elias, Ada said. Where is the old Hadley well? It collapsed, he said. In the spring floods. 3 years ago. There's no physical marker there anymore. So the deed references a boundary marker that doesn't exist, Clara said. Which means the survey description is based on a landmark that can't be verified, Ada said. Which means, Elias said slowly, the boundary might not be where they say it is. The three of them sat with that for a moment. Outside somewhere past the barn, one of the horses made a sound. A door moved in the breeze somewhere in the back of the house. The coffee had gone slightly cold in their cups, and none of them had noticed. Get to the lawyer first, Ada said, before Pruitt figures out that we've looked at it closely. I'll ride to town tomorrow morning, Elias said. Today, Ada said. Ride today. If Pruitt is part of this, he'll hear from your father the minute those three get back to Abilene, and he'll want to get ahead of any challenge." Elias nodded. He stood up. He put the deed back in his vest. He looked at Clara. "You'll be all right here." "Ada's here," Clara said. "I know Ada's here. I'm asking about you." She looked up at him and felt that thing again, that loosening in her chest. That particular quality of being seen that she had no real experience with and was still learning to tolerate without deflecting. "I'll be all right," she said. "Go." He went. They heard him in the barn, brief and efficient, and then the sound of hooves on the drive going out at a pace considerably faster than the Whitcombs had arrived. Ada started clearing the coffee cups. Clara sat at the table and looked at the space where the deed had been. "Ada," she said. He said we. He said we do it together." "I heard him," Ada said. "He didn't have to say that." "No?" Ada agreed. "He didn't." She looked at Clara from the kitchen counter, that small, complete smile that meant she was satisfied with what she was seeing. "But that's the kind of man he is. When he decides someone is his, they're his. Not like property," she added quickly, seeing Clara's expression. "Like family. Like a thing worth protecting. Like something real." Clara looked down at her hands on the table. Her grandmother's comb was still in her hair from the morning. She reached up and touched it. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said. "I got on that stage because I had no other choice. I came here because it was either this or nothing." "I know," Ada said. "And now I'm sitting at this table and there's a forged deed and a corrupt land board member and my entire family riding back to town to figure out their next move, and I'm—" She stopped. "I'm not afraid," she said, like she was reporting on something that surprised her. "I should be afraid. But I'm not." Ada put the cups in the basin and came back to the table and sat down across from her. "You know what I think," she said. "What?" "I think you've been afraid your whole life," Ada said. "Afraid of your father, afraid of your brothers, afraid of what the world thought of you. And you carried it so long, it became normal." She folded her hands on the table. "And then you came here, and for the first time in your life, you had ground to stand on. Decent ground. And you found out that you are a great deal braver than you ever got the chance to know." Clara looked at her. She pressed her lips together. She breathed through the sting in her eyes. "He'll be back before dark," Ada said, not cruelly, gently, like she was giving Clara something to hold on to. "And when he gets back, whatever the lawyer said, you'll deal with it together. That's what together means." Clara nodded. "Now," Ada said, standing up. "I need help with these preserves because the tomatoes are not going to put themselves up, and sitting here waiting for bad news is exactly as useful as it sounds." Clara almost laughed. She stood up. "Hand me the jar rings," she said. "Already on the counter." They worked side by side in the kitchen, through the afternoon, the two of them. The sounds of the ranch going on outside the window, the summer heat pressing in from every direction, and the kitchen fan of a lamp doing nothing useful about it. And Clara canned tomatoes and thought about ground and what it meant to have some. Elias came back at 5:30. Clara was on the porch when she heard him coming. She stood up from the chair she'd been sitting in and watched him ride in and hand off the horse to Decker and come up the porch steps and stop in front of her. His face told her most of it before he spoke. "The lawyer's name is Aldrich," he said. "James Aldrich. He's handled land cases in this county for 20 years. He looked at the deed." "And," Clara said. "The boundary issue is real," Elias said. "The collapsed well marker," Aldrich said, "that's grounds to challenge the entire survey description, which means the legal status of the deed is at minimum questionable and possibly void." He paused. He also said, another pause, and this one had something different in it. He said the notary Marsh notarized 2 other documents for Pruitt in the last 6 months. Both of them related to water access claims. Both of them on parcels that bordered established ranches. Clara stared at him. "He's been doing this to other people." "We're not the first," Elias said. "Then it's not just my father," she said. This is bigger than my family's grudge." "Yes," Elias said. "It is." He sat down on the porch steps. He set his hat on his knee. He looked out at the drive, at the gate, at the road beyond, in that way he had of looking at the middle distance when he was working through something. Clara sat down beside him, not quite touching, close. "This could go to the territorial court," he said. "If Aldrich can connect Pruitt and Marsh to the other parcels, it's not just a property dispute, it's fraud, at the county level." "And my father?" "He's a piece of it," Elias said. "A pawn mostly, a useful one." He looked at her. "He may face consequences, depending on how much he knew and how much he was used." Clara thought about her father in his good coat, with his rehearsed expression holding that deed. She thought about whether he had known he was being used by Pruitt, or whether he had simply been desperate and greedy and taken money that was offered without asking enough questions. She thought it was probably both. "I want to testify," she said. "If it goes to court, I want to give testimony about the forged letter and the travel money." Elias looked at her. "He used me," she said. "Both of them used me. My family used me to get onto this property, and Pruitt used my family to put pressure on you. I'm part of this chain, whether I want to be or not." She held his gaze. "So I want to be part of closing it." He looked at her for a long moment. The evening light was going gold, and the shadows were getting long, and somewhere in the kitchen, Ada had started supper, and the smell of it was coming out through the screen door. "All right," he said. "Aldrich will want to speak with you." "I'll speak to him," she said. Elias nodded. He looked back at the road. "Clara," he said. You told your father goodbye today like you meant it." She was quiet for a moment. "I did mean it," she said finally. "I spent a long time waiting for him to see me differently. And I think today I understood that he never will. Not really." She looked at her hands. "So I said goodbye to the version of him I'd been waiting for. The one who was going to someday tell me I was worth something." She paused. "He doesn't exist." The evening settled around them. The air had that end-of-day quality, the heat breaking at the edges, the world exhaling. "For what it's worth," Elias said quietly, not looking at her. "I think you're worth quite a lot." Clara didn't answer right away. She let the words sit where he'd put them. Then she said just as quietly, "That's worth a good deal. Coming from you." He looked at her then. She looked back. Neither of them said anything else, and they didn't need to, and the evening held them both in it, like something was beginning to take proper shape, not rushed, not performed, but real and slow and sure, the way things are when they're going to last. Ada opened the screen door. "Supper," she said. Then she looked at the two of them on the steps and closed the screen door again, and went back to the stove and gave them another 5 minutes. Inside, somewhere in the ledger books on the shelf by Elias's desk, there were water rights documents that Clara hadn't found yet. Old ones. Documents from before the Hadley parcel was ever split. Documents that if she had thought to look might have changed the shape of this entire fight. She hadn't looked yet, but tomorrow morning she would. She found the ledger books before sunrise. She had not been able to sleep, not from fear this time, but from the particular restlessness that comes when your mind has grabbed onto something and refuses to let go until you follow it all the way to the end. She lay on her cot for an hour, listening to the ranch settle around her in the dark, and then she got up, lit the small lamp on the kitchen table, and went to the shelf by Elias's desk. There were 6 ledger books. Black covers worn at the corners, the years written in pencil on the spines in a hand that changed across the decades. The earlier ones in a heavier script she didn't recognize, probably Elias's father, and the later ones in Elias's own careful print. She pulled the oldest 3 and set them on the desk and started reading. She was not entirely sure what she was looking for. She was following the instinct she'd developed over 13 years of managing a household on no money and no help. The instinct that said, when something doesn't add up, you go back to the beginning and you read everything before you decide what's missing. She found it in the second ledger, 1861. A property entry written in the heavy hand of Elias's father, Robert Boone, dated June of that year, 3 pages long, and cross-referenced to a document she could see had been folded and tucked into the back inside cover of the book. She took the folded paper out very carefully because it was old and the fold lines had gone fragile, and she spread it on the desk under the lamp. It was a water rights agreement. Original. Between Robert Boone and the Hadley family, both of them jointly securing shared access to the creek that ran along the east property line. The language was formal and specific. It named the creek. It named the acreage. It named Black Cedar Ranch by its original deed description. And at the bottom, in the particular legal language of 1861 Kansas territorial law, it said that the water rights agreement was permanent and attached to the land, not to the individual owners, and would remain in effect regardless of future sale or transfer of either property. Clara sat back in the chair. Regardless of future sale or transfer of either property. When the Hadley parcel was sold, when it was split at county auction, and Pruitt arranged to have the corner section acquired through Silas Whitcomb, nobody had checked for prior agreements. Or someone had checked and hoped nobody else would, because if this document was valid, and it was dated and signed and witnessed, and she could see the county recording stamp on the back, then Silas Whitcomb had not bought water rights at all. He had bought a piece of land that was already legally obligated to share its water with Black Cedar Ranch in perpetuity. Her hands were very steady on the paper. She heard a sound from the hallway. Footsteps. She recognized the particular pattern of a man who'd been awake before dawn for 36 years and moved through the early morning with the automatic precision of long habit. Elias appeared in the doorway of the study. He was already half-dressed, suspenders down, boots in his hand, and he stopped when he saw her at his desk with the lamp and the open ledgers. "Clara," he said, and then looking at her face. "What did you find?" She held up the water rights document. He crossed the room in 4 steps and took it from her and read it. She watched him read it. She watched his eyes move down the page and then stop and go back to the top and move down again more slowly, the way you read something a second time when the first read told you something important and you need to make sure you understood it right. He looked up. His face in the lamplight was something she had no word for. "When did you find this?" he said. 20 minutes ago, she said. "It was in the second ledger, your father's handwriting." "I didn't know this existed," he said. He looked back at the document. "I went through all the property records when I took over the ranch. I went through everything." "It was inside the cover," she said. "Folded in, not filed separately, not indexed, just tucked in." He set the paper down on the desk very carefully, like it was something that might startle if handled wrong. Then he pressed both hands flat on the desk and looked at it. "If this holds," he said. "It should hold," Clara said. "Permanent and attached to the land. That language is specific." "Aldrich needs to see this today," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm awake." He looked at her then. Really looked at her the way he sometimes did when he thought she wasn't fully paying attention, the way she had started to recognize and had not yet figured out how to receive gracefully. "You were up reading ledger books at 4 in the morning," he said. "I couldn't sleep." "Clara, I told you I wanted to help," she said. "This is me helping." He looked at her for another moment. Something moved through his expression, that warmth she was becoming accustomed to seeing in him, the kind that didn't perform itself, didn't announce itself, just arrived and stayed. "All right," he said quietly. "Let me get my boots on." He rode to Abilene before breakfast. Clara packed the water rights document in the leather folio Elias kept on the top shelf, the one he used for important papers, and she wrapped it carefully because the fold lines were fragile, and the last thing they needed was for the document to fall apart before a lawyer could look at it. Ada came into the kitchen at 6 and found Clara already had the fire built and the coffee on and eggs in the pan. And she stopped in the doorway the same way she always stopped when Clara had gotten somewhere before her, with that particular expression of someone recalculating their expectation of the morning. "You didn't sleep," Ada said. "I slept some," Clara said. "How much is some?" "Enough," Clara said. She slid the eggs onto a plate and set it on the table. "Sit down, eat." Ada sat. She looked at the empty place where Elias usually sat. He's already gone. Left at 5:30. Ada looked at Clara with the patient, observant expression she used when she was waiting for the full story. Clara told her about the ledger books, the folded document, the 1861 agreement, and its language about permanent water rights. Ada listened without interrupting, which was not always her habit, but was what she did when something mattered enough to hear completely. When Clara finished, Ada picked up her fork, looked at it, set it back down and said, "His father knew." "Seems like," Clara said. "Robert Boone was a careful man," Ada said. "He didn't leave things to chance." She looked at the hallway toward the study. He tucked it in the ledger instead of filing it because he wanted it found by someone who would actually read the ledgers, not just someone going through the official files. Clara had not thought of it that way. She sat with it for a moment. "You think he meant for it to be found like that?" "I think he was a man who'd seen enough of the world to know that official files get lost. Stolen, misfiled," Ada said. "But a man who actually runs his ranch reads his ledgers." She looked at Clara. "And apparently so does the woman keeping his house." Clara looked at her coffee cup. The morning was coming in through the kitchen window, now the gray, going gold quality of early summer light that she had started to associate with this place, with the particular sound of black cedar, waking up horses and birds, and the distant clink of Decker working on something in the barn. She had been here less than 2 months. It felt like longer. It felt like the kind of place that got into you fast. "Ada," she said. What was he like before the fire? Before Ellen?" Ada was quiet for a moment, and Clara understood the question might have been too much, too personal, too early in whatever this was between them. But Ada just looked at the table and said, "Lighter." He laughed more. Not he wasn't a different person. The core of him was always the same, the steadiness, the honor. But there was more ease in him. She looked up. The fire took Ellen, and it took that ease. And he's been carrying both losses for 6 years. Does he still love her?" Ada said gently. "He'll love her till he dies. That's how he's made." She held Clara's gaze. "But loving someone who's gone and loving someone who's here aren't the same feeling, and they don't take up the same space. You understand that?" Clara nodded slowly. "He's not replacing anything," Ada said. "He's adding to something. There's a difference." She picked up her fork again. "And for what it's worth, I haven't seen him ride to town twice in 1 week for anyone, ever, in 6 years. Clara felt the heat come up in her face and went back to her coffee. Elias came back at noon with James Aldrich. The lawyer was a compact, brisk man in his 60s, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, and the manner of someone who had spent 40 years listening to people explain their problems and had developed a very efficient system for identifying which ones were real and which ones were manufactured. He shook Ada's hand, then Clara's, and he said, "Miss Whitcomb, your signed statement was helpful. Elias tells me you're the one who found the 1861 document." "Yes, sir," Clara said. "Show me where it was," he said. She took him to the study and showed him the ledger and the inside cover, and the exact way the document had been folded into the binding. Aldrich looked at everything, the ledger, the binding, the fold, the document itself, with the careful attention of a man building a case in real time. "Original," he said half to himself. "County recording stamp, witness signatures." He turned it over, turned it back. "Language is clear, permanent and attached to the land." He looked up at Elias. "This supersedes any subsequent sale of the Hadley parcel." "Including the corner section," Elias said. "Including the corner section," Aldrich confirmed. "What Silas Whitcomb purchased, assuming his deed is even valid given the boundary marker issue, is a piece of land that is already legally obligated to share water access with Black Cedar Ranch. He cannot withhold it. He cannot charge for it. He cannot use it as leverage." He set the document down. "What he can do is realize he's been used by someone who knew this agreement existed and didn't tell him." The kitchen went quiet. "Pruitt knew," Elias said. "It wasn't a question. If he's been dealing in county land records the way we're beginning to believe," Aldrich said, "then yes. He would have had access to the recording archives. he would have seen the 1861 filing. He took his spectacles off and cleaned them with his coat, which means he deliberately concealed it from your father-in-law when he set up the arrangement. Silas isn't my father-in-law, Elias said. Aldrich glanced between him and Clara. My apologies. From the Whitcomb man. He put his spectacles back on. He set up an arrangement where Whitcomb paid money for something that had no value as leverage, which means either Pruitt intended to let Whitcomb discover the problem on his own when the legal challenge came, or he intended to be long gone from the situation by then, Ada said from the doorway. Aldrich pointed at her. Exactly. What do we do? Clara asked. All three of them looked at her. She had said we without thinking about it, and she registered it a half-second after it was out, and she didn't take it back. We file, Aldrich said. We file the 1861 document with the county recorder's office today, formally with a legal brief attached, challenging the validity of the corner section deed and citing the prior agreement. We also file a separate complaint with the Territorial Land Office regarding Gerald Marsh's notary activities. I have the documentation on the other 2 parcels he handled for Pruitt. That complaint will trigger an investigation. How long? Elias asked. The water rights challenge 2 weeks, maybe 3 to get a formal ruling. The Marsh investigation could take months. Aldrich looked at Clara. Your testimony about the forged letter and the travel money will be relevant to establishing the full pattern. Are you willing to give that testimony before a territorial court judge if it comes to that? Yes, Clara said. It will mean your family hearing you say it under oath in a public proceeding. I know what it means, she said. Aldrich nodded once. He picked up the 1861 document with both hands cradling it. Then we have work to do. I'll need this today. Take it, Elias said. Aldrich left. The 3 of them stood in the study in the particular quiet of people who have just set something in motion and are feeling the weight of what that means. Then Decker appeared at the study door, hat in hand, with an expression that meant news. Elias, he said, there's someone at the gate. It's not the Whitcombs. Who is it? Decker hesitated. It's a woman. Says her name is Martha Fenwick. Says her husband's ranch borders the Clover Creek parcel on the north side. He paused. Says she heard there might be people here who'd want to know about what Pruitt did to her husband's water rights last spring. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. Clara looked at Elias. Elias looked at Ada. Ada looked at the doorway where Decker was standing. Let her in, Elias said. Martha Fenwick was a woman in her late 40s with the calloused hands of someone who'd been working land her whole life and the set jaw of someone who'd been fighting for it. She came into the kitchen and sat at the table and accepted the coffee Ada put in front of her and looked at Elias and said, You're taking Pruitt to the Territorial Land Office. We filed this morning, Elias said. Good, she said, because I've got 2 neighbors who'll do the same. Sam Briggs on the East Road lost a well access claim to a Marsh notarized deed last fall. Ed Tolliver had a water easement challenged on the North Creek in February. Both of them think they've got no legal standing. She looked at Clara, assessed her, in that fast, complete way that women who've dealt with hard things tend to assess each other not unkindly, just accurately. You're the Whitcomb woman. Clara, she said. I heard about you, Martha said. Heard what your family started, and heard you wrote a statement for Pike. She paused. That took courage. Not as much as staying would have taken, Clara said, thinking of Martha's situation of fighting for land and water alone. Martha almost smiled. Fair point. She looked at Elias. If this goes to the territorial court, you'll need more than 1 ranch. You'll need a pattern. You'll need Briggs and Tolliver and anyone else Pruitt's done this to. Can you get them to testify? Elias asked. I can try, Martha said. Briggs is stubborn, but he's not stupid. Tolliver's afraid, but his wife isn't. She picked up her coffee cup. You file, you build your case, you make sure Aldrich has what he needs from all of us, and Pruitt won't have anywhere to stand. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon when Martha Fenwick left, and what had started as a fight between Elias Boone and one fraudulent deed had become something considerably larger. Clara stood at the kitchen window and watched Martha's horse go down the drive, and felt something she recognized from a story her mother used to tell her about how the right small thing done at the right moment can pull a thread that unravels a much larger wrong. Her mother had told her that story about quilting, about how you find the one bad stitch and pull it, and the whole flawed section comes apart so you can do it right. She had found the document in the ledger. That was the thread. "You're thinking loud again," Elias said behind her. She turned. He was leaning in the doorway of the kitchen watching her. "I do that," she said. "I've noticed." He came into the kitchen and poured himself the last of the coffee that had been sitting since noon, and was probably terrible by now, and he drank it without complaint, which was very like him. "You want to tell me what you're thinking about?" "I'm thinking about my mother," she said. "About something she used to say." He waited. "She said that most bad things don't end all at once. They end one thread at a time." Clara looked at the window. "I think she was right." "She sounds like she was a sensible woman," Elias said. "She was the best person I ever knew," Clara said simply. He was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry you lost her early." "I am too," Clara said. She turned from the window. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask me anything," he said. "Do you regret it, the letter, sending for someone, all of this?" She gestured, meaning the legal fight, the Whitcombs, the territory court, all of it. "Do you regret that you started it?" He looked at her steadily. "I regret that your family treated you the way they did," he said. "I regret that Pruitt used that situation to try and take something from this ranch." He set his coffee cup down. "I don't regret one single thing about you being here. Not one." The words were so plain and so certain that Clara had to look away for a moment. "I think about what would have happened if I hadn't found that ledger," she said. "If I'd just left the books alone." "You weren't going to leave the books alone," Elias said. "That's not how you're made." She looked back at him. "You say that like you know how I'm made." "I've been paying attention," he said. "Not defensive, not performed, just true." She held his gaze for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, and then she said, "Well, you're not wrong." He almost smiled. "I know." Ada came in from the back with a basket of laundry, and stopped when she felt the quality of the silence in the kitchen, and then, without a word, turned right back around and went out the way she'd come in. Elias looked at the back door. "She does that," he said. "I've noticed," Clara said. "She's not subtle," he said. "She's perfectly subtle," Clara said. "She just doesn't bother when she thinks it's unnecessary." He looked at her, then fully the way he did sometimes in the evenings. Open, unguarded, the scarred side of his face, and the unscarred side both equally present, equally his. And she had stopped seeing the difference sometime in the last 2 weeks without noticing exactly when. "Clara," he said. "Elias," she said. "I want to—" He stopped. He pressed his lips together in that way he had when he was choosing words carefully. "I'm not good at saying things directly." "I know," she said. "You're better at doing them." "That's true," he said. "But some things need to be said." He looked at the table, back at her. "You've been here less than 2 months, and I—" He stopped again. "You found a document in my father's ledger that might save this ranch. You stood in front of your family and said what needed to be said. You made a statement for Pike and agreed to testify before a territorial judge." He paused. "And you talked to my horse in a storm." Clara felt something warm move through her chest. "That was the first night." "I know," he said. "That was when I started paying attention." She looked at him. "Elias?" "Just say the thing," she said. "You can say it plain. I won't be frightened of it." He looked at her for a long moment. In the yard, one of the horses made a sound. Somewhere in the barn, Decker was moving around. The afternoon was going gold outside the window, and the ranch was doing what it always did at this hour, settling into the ease of late day. "I'd like you to stay," Elias said. "Not because the house needs keeping, or because there's a legal fight to manage, or because your family made it complicated for you to go somewhere else. He held her gaze. Because I want you here. Because this place is better with you in it. Because I wake up in the morning and the house doesn't feel empty anymore, and that matters to me more than I know how to say properly. Clara looked at him. She thought about the stage and the carpet bag and the stale bread, and her brothers laughing on the porch. She thought about walking up to this gate and expecting dismissal and getting courtesy instead. She thought about smoke in the storm and the coat around her shoulders, and you'll be treated accordingly, and the ledger books at 4 a.m, and we do it together. She thought about what her mother had said about plain women and paying attention. I want to stay, she said. He let out a breath, quiet, controlled, but she heard it. Then stay, he said. I plan to, she said. The late afternoon held them in it, and the ranch went on around them, and Ada came back in from the laundry a few minutes later and looked at the two of them at the kitchen table with their coffee, his terrible hers, long cold, and she said nothing at all except, I'm making biscuits tonight, and that was how it was settled. But what none of them knew, yet what wouldn't become clear until the following week, when Aldrich sent a rider out from Abilene with a message that arrived at Black Cedar on a Thursday morning with a county seal on the outside, was that the territorial land investigation had moved faster than anyone expected, and that Leonard Pruitt had found out about the filing, and that he had not decided to go quietly. The rider came on Thursday morning while Clara was in the kitchen garden. She heard the horse on the main road and straightened up and watched him come through the gate. A young man she didn't recognize, riding fast with a leather dispatch bag over his shoulder, and the focused expression of someone who'd been told not to stop until he got where he was going. He pulled up at the porch and called for Elias before he'd even fully dismounted. Elias came off the porch in 3 steps. He took the envelope the rider held out, looked at the county seal, and opened it right there in the yard. Clara pulled off her garden gloves and walked over. She watched his face while he read. She had gotten good at reading Elias's face in the weeks she'd been here, not because he was expressive, but because she had learned where to look. The slight tension at the corner of his jaw, the way his eyes moved when something landed wrong versus when something landed right. What she saw now was neither. What she saw was a man recalibrating. What is it? She asked. He looked up from his letter. Pruitt's filed a counter-complaint, he said, with the Territorial Land Office. He's claiming the 1861 document is a forgery. The word hit her like cold water. A forgery. He's saying the document was fabricated, that it was planted in the ledger to obstruct a legitimate property transaction. Elias's voice was even, but his jaw was tight. He's calling for an emergency review before the water rights case can move forward. That's... Clara stopped. She made herself breathe. That's not possible. The document is original. The recording stamped the signatures. The paper itself, Aldrich looked at it. Aldrich's opinion isn't the only one that counts in a territorial review, Elias said. He's stalling, Clara said. He knows the investigation into Marsh is moving and he's trying to buy time. I know what he's doing, Elias said. He folded the letter and put it in his vest. He looked at the rider. When was this filed? Yesterday afternoon, the rider said. Mr. Aldrich says to come to town today if you can. He says there's more. More, Elias repeated. Yes, sir. He says Pruitt's also filed a statement claiming that a woman residing at Black Cedar Ranch has been interfering with county land processes. That her involvement in the case constitutes conflict of interest. The rider glanced at Clara with a look that was apologetic without knowing how to say so. He named you ma'am, by full name. The yard went very still. Ada had come out onto the porch. She was holding her dishcloth and her expression had gone to the careful, controlled version of itself that Clara now knew meant she was angry and managing it. Clara stood in the summer heat and felt something move through her that was not quite anger and not quite fear. It was something colder than anger and cleaner than fear. It was the feeling of a line being crossed in a way that made everything that came after very simple. Pruitt had come after Elias through the land. He had used Silas Whitcomb as a tool. He had hidden behind Marcia's notary stamps and county board authority and the general assumption that a man in a position of official power could outlast people who had less resources and less standing. And now he was coming after her by name. "All right," she said. Elias looked at her. "Clara, I said all right," she said. Her voice was level. "We go to town, we talk to Aldrich, and then we figure out what Pruitt actually has, because a man who has a strong legal position doesn't file emergency counter-complaints and attack the people around his opponent." She met Elias's eyes. "He's scared. That's what this is." Elias looked at her for a long moment. Something settled in his expression. "Get your coat," he said. "It's July. Get whatever you need," he said. "We leave in 20 minutes. Ada was already back inside. Clara followed her and found her in the bedroom doorway, with Clara's good dress folded over her arm and her grandmother's comb in her other hand. "You're going to need to look like someone who cannot be rattled," Ada said. Clara took the dress. "I am someone who cannot be rattled." "I know that," Ada said. "Make sure Pruitt knows it too." They made the ride to Abilene in 35 minutes, which was 5 minutes faster than usual, and neither of them mentioned the pace. Aldrich met them at the door of his office. He had the look of a man who'd been awake since the counter-complaint landed on his desk, slightly rumpled, very alert, with the focused energy of someone who'd spent the night turning a problem over and finding its edges. "Sit down," he said. They sat. Clara folded her hands in her lap and waited. "The counter-complaint itself is not a serious legal document," Aldrich said. "It's a delay tactic, and any territorial judge worth his salary will see through it inside of 20 minutes. The forgery claim is particularly weak. The paper, the ink, the recording stamp, the witness signatures, all of it is consistent with 1861 origin. I've already contacted a document examiner in Topeka who can testify to that." He looked at Elias. "The claim against Miss Whitcomb is more troubling. Not legally, it has no legal basis whatsoever, but publicly. He's filed it with the county recorder's office, which means it's a public record, which means it will be talked about." "It's already being talked about," Elias said. "Yes," Aldrich confirmed. "Pruitt is counting on the talk doing more damage than the legal claim. He wants this community to look at the situation and see a woman with no local standing, no family connections, no history in this county inserting herself into a property dispute." He looked at Clara. "He's trying to make you look like the problem." "He's been trying to make her look like the problem since before he ever knew her name," Elias said. "I understand that," Aldrich said. "The question is how we respond." He leaned forward. "I want to accelerate the timeline. I want to push for a formal hearing before the territorial circuit judge as soon as possible, within the week if I can arrange it. I want the 1861 document authenticated by the Topeka examiner before the hearing. And I want every rancher Pruitt has defrauded in this county to be present in that courtroom." "Martha Fenwick can bring Briggs and Tolliver," Clara said. "I've already sent her a message," Aldrich said. "She responded this morning. They'll be there." He paused. "There's one more thing. And this is the part that requires something from you specifically, Miss Whitcomb." Clara waited. "Pruitt's statement names you as an outside party with no legitimate connection to this case or this community." Aldrich looked at her steadily. "The most effective rebuttal to that claim is not a legal argument. It's your presence and your testimony delivered clearly before a judge and whatever members of this community choose to attend." He paused. "Can you do that?" "I've been doing it since I got off the stage," Clara said. Aldrich almost smiled. "Good," he said. "Then we're ready." They were walking back to the wagon when she heard Caleb's voice. He was across the street outside the feed store, and he was talking to two men she didn't know in the loud carrying way he had when he wanted an audience. He had clearly seen them arrive. He had clearly decided this was an opportunity. "There she is," he said, not to her, to the men beside him, but loud enough for half the street to hear. "The woman who turned on her own family to chase after a scarred cowboy's money." He picked at his thumbnail. Daddy always said she had ideas above herself. Looks like he was right. The two men looked. People on the sidewalk looked. This was Abilene, and people were careful about publicly taking sides in ongoing disputes, but they were not careful about listening. Elias started to turn. Clara put her hand on his arm. Just for a second. Just enough. Then she turned around herself and looked at her brother across the street and said in a voice that carried without being raised, "Caleb, you want to have this conversation right here." Caleb blinked. He hadn't expected her to engage. He was used to her walking away. "I'm just stating facts," he said. "Then let me state some," Clara said. She crossed the street, not fast, not angry, just steady and direct. She stopped 10 feet from him. "You forged a letter in another man's name and sent me across 2 days of Kansas plains with stale bread and one dress. You took travel money that was meant to give me a fair start, and you spent it. And then you stood in a saloon and told people that Elias Boone purchased me like livestock." The two men beside Caleb were very still. "And now," Clara continued, "there's a territorial court case in motion because what you started was connected to a county land fraud scheme that has hurt at least 3 other families in this county. So when you stand outside the feed store and call it me having ideas above myself, I want you to understand something very clearly." She stopped. "The ideas I have are about justice, and they are in front of a circuit judge, and they have my name on them." "What ideas do you have, Caleb? What's your name on?" Caleb's face had gone red. The two men beside him were looking at the ground. "You don't embarrass me," Clara said. "You embarrass yourself, and you have been doing it for years without anyone telling you so." She looked at him for one more second. "I hope someday you find something worth being instead of just being mean." She turned around and walked back to the wagon. Elias was standing at the wagon. His expression was the one she'd seen the night he found her in the barn with Smoke, the one she'd finally found a word for. The word was admiration. He didn't say anything. He held out his hand to help her up to the wagon seat. She took it. They rode back to Black Cedar in a quiet that felt entirely different from the tight waiting quiet of the past week. This was the quiet of something having been said that needed to be said, of air clearing after a long stillness. "You didn't need me to say anything," Elias said at one point. "I know," Clara said, "but I'm glad you were there." "So am I," he said. The hearing was set for the following Tuesday. Aldrich worked through the weekend, and so did Clara, organizing the documents, writing out her testimony in long, careful sentences that said exactly what happened and nothing more and nothing less. She had always written well, her mother's gift to her, and she put all of it into those pages. The forged letter, the stolen money, the stage, the arrival, the water rights document in the ledger. The morning she found it, she wrote it like a story because it was one. She wrote it like the truth because it was. Ada proofread it on Sunday evening and handed it back without changing a word. "That'll do," she said, which was the highest praise Ada gave anything. Martha Fenwick arrived Monday with Sam Briggs and Ed Tolliver, and Tolliver's wife, a woman named Frances, who had the kind of quiet, enduring ferocity that Clara recognized from looking in the mirror. They sat at the kitchen table at Black Cedar and went through their testimonies with Aldrich until past dark, and Clara fed them all, and listened, and added a detail here and there when Aldrich asked, and by the end of the evening, she felt the shape of the case. The way you feel the shape of a quilt. When all the pieces are finally laid out, each part distinct, each part necessary, the whole thing larger and more solid than any single piece suggested. Pruitt had made a mistake. Not just legally. He had made the mistake that men who underestimate people always make. He had assumed that the people he'd defrauded were isolated. He had assumed that a widow and 2 ranchers who thought they had no legal standing would stay quiet. He had assumed that a plain woman with no local connections and a family scandal behind her was too easy a target to bother outmaneuvering. He had been wrong on every count. Tuesday came in hot and clear, the kind of July day that made everything sharp-edged and certain. They rode into Abilene in a group, Elias and Clara in the wagon. Ada beside them, Martha and her neighbors behind Aldrich, meeting them at the courthouse steps, with his case files under his arm, and that brisk, focused expression that Clara had come to associate with things going the way they should. The courtroom was fuller than she'd expected. Word had gotten around the way word always gets around in a small town, and people had come. Not all of them friendly, not all of them hostile. Most of them simply people who understood that what happened in that room today was going to affect the shape of this county for years to come. Pruitt was already there. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s, with a prosperous coat, and the confident bearing of someone who had spent a long time being the most powerful person in most rooms. He was sitting at the respondent's table, with a lawyer Clara didn't recognize, and he looked at Elias when they came in with the flat, assessing look of a man who still believed he had a path through this. He looked at Clara, and his expression shifted slightly, recalibrating. She had the impression he had expected someone easier to dismiss in person. She held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds, and then looked away, because she had more important things to look at. The circuit judge was a man named Harlan Vesper, 60 years old, with a reputation Aldrich had told her for impatience with time-wasters, and an extensive knowledge of territorial land law. He came in without ceremony, sat down, looked at the room over his spectacles, and said, "Let's begin." What followed was 3 hours that Clara would remember in pieces rather than sequence, not because she lost track, but because certain moments burned themselves in more clearly than others. Aldrich presenting the 1861 document and the written assessment from the Topeka examiner confirming its authenticity. Pruitt's lawyer objecting, and Vesper overruling him with a brevity that suggested he found the objection unpersuasive. Martha Fenwick on the stand, steady and factual, describing the Clover Creek access claim, and the Marsh notarized deed, and the money her husband had spent fighting something that turned out to have been manufactured. Sam Briggs, who had the blunt, economical speech of a man who did not enjoy talking, but understood the necessity of it, laying out the East Road well access case in 6 sentences that were more damning for their plainness than any elaborate argument could have been. And then Clara. She walked to the stand and sat down and looked at Judge Vesper, and then at the room, and found Elias in the 3rd row. He was watching her with that still-present quality that she had come to understand was how he paid attention when something mattered to him. She looked at Aldrich and answered his questions. She told the story of the forged letter and the stolen travel money in the same plain sequential way she had written it. She described the arrival at Black Cedar Ranch. She described the morning she found the 1861 document in the ledger. She answered every question without hesitation and without decoration. Pruitt's lawyer stood up for cross-examination and asked her how long she had been residing at Black Cedar Ranch. 2 months, she said, and in that time you have become involved in a property dispute that predates your arrival by years. I found a document that was relevant to the case, she said. I found it because I was reading the ranch ledgers. That's not involvement, that's paying attention. You have no professional background in land law. No, she said. I have a professional background in reading carefully and telling the truth. Someone in the courtroom made a sound that might have been a laugh, quickly suppressed. Pruitt's lawyer tried 2 more angles and found them both equally unproductive and sat down. Judge Vesper made a note. Then he looked at the room over his spectacles and said, "I'm going to say something that I don't always say from this bench, which is that the pattern of activity documented in this proceeding is among the more egregious examples of county-level land fraud I have seen in 20 years on the territorial circuit." He looked at Pruitt. The counter-complaint alleging forgery of the 1861 document is dismissed. The document is authentic and its terms are legally binding. He looked at the papers in front of him. The corner section deed given the invalid boundary marker reference, and the prior agreement is void. The water rights of Black Cedar Ranch are confirmed as established in 1861 and unaffected by any subsequent transaction. He set his pen down. I am furthermore referring the matter of Gerald Marsh's notary activities to the Territorial Attorney General's Office for investigation of fraud. And I am noting in the record that Mr. Silas Whitcomb appears to have been a participant in an arrangement that, while he may not have fully understood its fraudulent elements, resulted in material harm to at least one party. He looked up. This court is adjourned. The room moved all at once. Sound and motion. People standing. Aldrich shaking Elias's hand. Martha Fenwick letting out a long breath that sounded like weeks of held tension finally releasing. Clara sat in the witness chair for one moment longer than necessary. She was thinking about her mother, about the story of the bad stitch, and the thread you pull to unravel the flaw so you can do it right, about plain women and paying attention. She stood up. Elias was there. Not pushing through the crowd dramatically, just present the way he always was there when she turned around, steady, certain. "It's done," she said. "It's done," he confirmed. She looked at him and felt the full weight of everything that had led to this moment. The stage ride and the carpet bag, and the storm in the barn, and the ledger at 4 a.m, and the kitchen table and the biscuits, and we do it together, and I want you here, and stay all of it accumulating to this. The two of them standing in a courtroom in Abilene, while the summer light came through the high windows, and the last 2 months of her life finally completely made sense. "I want to go home," she said. Something in his face shifted. Not surprised. More like confirmed. Like something he'd hoped for had just been said out loud. "Then let's go home," he said. They were on the courthouse steps when Silas Whitcomb appeared. He was alone. No Roy, no Caleb. Just her father, in his good coat, standing at the bottom of the steps with his hat in his hands and an expression she had never seen on his face before. He looked diminished. Not physically, he was the same size he'd always been. But something in how he was carrying himself had changed. The entitlement that had always inflated him was gone, and without it, he was just an old man who had made bad choices and was standing in the evidence of them. Clara stopped on the step above him. Elias stopped beside her. Not in front, not behind. Beside. "Clara," her father said. "Daddy." He turned his hat in his hands. "I didn't know," he said. "About Pruitt. About what the deed was actually for. He told me it was a straightforward land purchase. He told me the water rights were legitimate." Clara looked at him. "Did you ask questions?" she said. "When a man you barely knew offered you money to buy a specific piece of land adjacent to a specific ranch, did you ask why?" Silas was quiet. "No?" Clara said. "You didn't. Because you wanted to believe it was a way to have something over Elias. Something over me." She kept her voice even. She had not come this far to lose her composure on courthouse steps. "You didn't ask because the answer mattered less than the leverage." Her father looked at the ground. "I know I haven't." He stopped, started again. "I know I wasn't what a father ought to be." "No," Clara said. "You weren't." He looked up. "I am sorry, Clara." She held his gaze. She waited inside herself for the thing that those words should have done. The relief, the softening, the old hunger for his acknowledgement finally being fed. She waited for it the way she had waited her whole life. It didn't come. Not the way she'd imagined it would. What she felt instead was something quieter. Not forgiveness exactly. Forgiveness was a longer road and she knew it. But something like release. Like the weight of waiting for something that wasn't going to come in the form you needed, it was finally quietly being set down. "I know you are," she said. "I think you mean it today standing here." She paused. "I hope you go home and you still mean it tomorrow. And the day after. Because meaning it once doesn't change what was Daddy. It only has a chance of changing what comes next." Silas nodded. He looked at Elias. Something passed between them. Not warmth, not yet, maybe not ever, but a kind of acknowledgement. Man to man. This is where we are. "Take care of her," Silas said. "She takes care of herself," Elias said. "But yes, I plan to." Silas put his hat back on. He walked away down the street, and Clara watched him go, and she did not feel triumph, and she did not feel grief. She felt the particular peace of something being finished. Not fixed finished. There was a difference, and she was old enough now standing on these steps in the summer heat to understand it. Ada was waiting at the wagon. She looked at Clara's face and asked nothing, which was how Ada communicated the deepest kinds of understanding. Martha Fenwick caught Clara's arm before they reached the wagon. "You testified well," she said. "So did you," Clara said. Martha looked at her with those straight, assessing eyes. "You planning to stay out here?" "Yes," Clara said, without hesitation, without qualification. Martha nodded once firmly, like something had been confirmed to her satisfaction. "Good," she said. "This county needs women who don't look away." She walked back to her horse. Clara watched her go and thought that she had not known 2 months ago that this was the kind of woman she was. She had known she was patient. She had known she was stubborn. She had known she could work without complaining and endure without breaking. She had not known she was brave. Not this kind of brave. She knew it now. The ride back to Black Cedar was the easiest ride she'd had since coming to Kansas. The tension of the past week had lifted completely, and the summer afternoon had settled into the golden, easy quality that came in the late hours when the worst of the heat was done. Ada talked about the preserves and about a quilt she was thinking of starting. Elias said little, but that was simply how he was when things were well quiet, in the particular way of a man who is at peace. Clara watched the land go by and felt it this land, the way she had been feeling it for weeks now. Not like someone else's property she was allowed to stand on, but like somewhere that was becoming hers in the slow, true way that belonging happens when it's real. That evening after supper, Elias asked her to walk with him. They went to the hill behind the east barn, the one that looked out over the summer grasslands, and they stood there in the cooling air with the last of the day's light going gold and amber across everything. And he said, "I want to ask you something." "Ask it," she said. "I want this to be your home," he said. "Not in the way it's been, not keeping house and helping with the accounts and staying because it's better than leaving." He looked at her. "I want it to be yours because you chose it. Because you chose me." He reached into his coat pocket, and she felt her breath catch before she'd fully registered what he was doing. He held out his hand. In his palm was a ring simple gold, small enough to be modest and solid enough to be real. "I'm not a man who does things with a lot of ceremony," he said, "but I want to do this right." Clara looked at the ring, then at him. "You're asking me to marry you," she said. "I am," he said, "if you'll have me." She thought about the forged letter that had sent her here, and how she had for a time believed that everything that came from it was tainted by how it started. She understood now that the beginning of a thing doesn't determine its truth. What determines the truth is what you build on it, what you choose freely with your eyes open and your feet on solid ground. She held out her hand. He put the ring on her finger. It fit. She thought later that it fitting perfectly was the kind of thing that would have seemed like a sign if she'd been a more superstitious woman, and she wasn't superstitious, but she noted it anyway. "Yes," she said, "I'll have you." He looked at her the way he had looked at her the night of the storm and the morning of the ledger, and the afternoon in the courthouse, steadily, completely, without reservation. Then he did something she had not expected. He lifted her hand, the hand with the ring on it, and pressed his lips to her knuckles. Not dramatic, not performed. Just a man honoring something he intended to keep. "Clara Boone," he said, trying the sound of it. "Don't get ahead of yourself," she said. "Too late," he said. She laughed. She had not laughed fully without catching it since before her mother died. It came out of her whole and clean, and Elias looked at her like it was something worth traveling a long distance to hear. They stood on the hill until the light was gone, and the first stars were out, and the ranch below them was lit warm and quiet, the lantern on the porch doing what it always did, throwing its circle of light as far as the gate and no further enough to find your way home. Ada had seen them coming back across the yard and had put coffee on without being asked. And when they came in through the kitchen door, she looked at Clara's hand and then at Elias's face, and she set the coffee pot down and crossed the kitchen and took Clara's face in both hands and said, "Welcome home, honey. You were always supposed to be here." Clara held on to that for a long moment. Then she said, "I know. I just had to find out for myself." Ada laughed and let her go and went back to the coffee, and Elias sat down at the table, and Clara sat across from him, and outside the summer night held Black Cedar Ranch in its warm quiet. Dark, the horses in the barn, the stars overhead, the creek running along the east edge of the property, just as it had run for 30 years, and would run for 30 more unchallenged, unimpeded free. The woman who had been sent away as a joke had found the document that saved the ranch, had stood before a territorial judge and told the truth without flinching, had looked her father in the eye on courthouse steps and offered him something harder and more honest than forgiveness, the possibility of it, if he earned it. She had come to Black Cedar with stale bread and an old carpet bag and her grandmother's comb, and she was leaving none of those things behind. She was only adding to them, and the life she was building, one quiet chosen certain day at a time, was hers fully, and finally, in the way that only things you fight for and freely choose can ever truly be.